We're starting a new 4-part series called You'll Be Glad You Did. Now, when we enter into a new year, something that we all have in common is that we can look back in the past at life and recognize that there are some choices we've made in the past, there are some decisions we made, there are some habits that we formed, and today your life is better off because of those decisions that you made in the past. You're in a better place today. Your present self is in a better place because your past self made some wise choices. Conversely, we all know what it's like to look back in life and realize that we made the wrong choice. We made the wrong decision. We picked up some unhealthy habits, or we got into some unhealthy patterns of behavior, and today our lives are worse off for it. In fact, looking back at some of the decisions that we've made, some of us wonder, what was I thinking? Why did I think that was a good idea? Or how come even though I knew it was a bad idea, I decided to do it anyway? What made me think that I was the person who could defy the odds? What made me think that I was the person who could ignore the obvious outcomes? Why did I ignore the advice that my friends gave or my parents gave or my grandmama gave me? Because this obviously leads to an unhealthy destination. You see, looking back, something that we all have in common is the emotion of regret. Because nobody gets through life without looking back at some of the wrong choices and feeling regret. Regret because we missed out on an opportunity, or regret because we eliminated possible future opportunities because of our past decisions. You see, no student gets to the end of high school and says, I nailed that. I'm glad I never embarrassed myself once in high school. Nobody gets to the end of raising children and says, I crushed that. My kids are lucky to have me as a parent. And nobody gets to the end of life. See, as a pastor, sitting with people in hospice, nobody gets to the end of life without realizing the ways they misappropriated their time, their energy, their hearts, with the brief time that we have in this world. And the feeling, the emotion, everyone feels at different points in their lives is regret. Because looking back, well, hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? So the thing we all have in common when it comes to the new year and we look back into the past is there are some common themes. There are some things we look back at and say, we're glad we did. But there's other things where we say, we wish we had. There's other things where we say, we're glad we didn't, or we wish we hadn't. We all have that in common when it comes to looking at our past. That's why the question of this series is, if someone could build a time machine and you could borrow it for just an hour and go back and visit your past self, whether it's your past self from a year ago or 3 years ago or 10 years ago, you would have all kinds of very specific advice you would have for your younger self. Because on the hindsight of experience, you've learned some things about what choices and what decisions and what values matter the most to you. So you would just take however much time you had with your younger self and you would load them up with all kinds of specific advice. And by the time you got done and you hopped back in your DeLorean, you would say one last thing, trust me, you'll be glad you did. Just trust me, you'll be glad that you did. Now, I think it's a helpful exercise to look back and wonder, if I could do that, if I could give myself some younger advice, what advice would I give my younger self? Because you can learn something from that. I think it's helpful to ask the question, what should I have done? What should I have done in the past? In fact, this is part of my morning routine. I go back in time one day and I look back at my yesterday. What should I have done? Where did I mess up? How could I have been better? Because by asking yourself, what could I have done better? Where could I learn? Where could I be more godly? Where could I be more humble? I think you'll gain wisdom along the way. But there's two problems with that question. The first one is, it doesn't fix your past. You're still stuck with whatever outcomes and consequences from the behaviors of your past self. And the second problem is, it doesn't always help you figure out what to do right now with today's decisions, with today's habits, with today's relationships and behaviors. So in this series, I'm introducing you to what I believe is a better question that we find in the Bible. A better question that will give you more wisdom. And wisdom is simply knowing what to do with the complexities and realities of life, the real realities and complexities of life as it is. And the new question is one that can save us heartache. In fact, if you think back on your regrets in life, if you had asked this question right before you embraced the action that led to your regret, you could have saved yourself a lot of heartache, a lot of tears, a lot of money, a lot of time. You would have more opportunities today. Because this is a question that is a game changer when it comes to figuring out the right path forward, when it comes to making difficult decisions, when it comes to organizing your life around the most important values of your life. And the better question is that I'm going to introduce you to today, and then we're going to spend the next 3 weeks unpacking, is this question: what would the future you tell you to do? If the future you had 1 hour to sit down with you this afternoon, what would the future you tell you to do? If the future you had 1 hour and they laid out everything, if you laid out everything that you need to know about the next year, about the next 5 years, about the next years of your lifespan, what would the future you tell you to do? Now, here's what's interesting about this question. You don't need to think about it for more than 10 seconds before you start rattling off some answers, do you? Okay? As soon as you start thinking about the question, answers pop into your mind. Answers like, save more, spend less. That's what the future me would tell me to do. Or maybe it would be, eat healthier. Come on, lay off the processed foods. Eat healthier. You'll be glad you did. Or get more exercise. Or maybe you would say, prioritize your family. Not in your heart, on your calendar. Prioritize your family in your schedule. Or maybe the future you would say, have the hard conversation. You've been putting it off and it's not getting any better. Pick up the phone, have the hard conversation. Or maybe the future you would say, quit pornography. Get help. It is not helping you. Or maybe the future you would say, schedule the appointment. Quit avoiding the appointment. Or maybe the future you would say, apologize. Your self-righteousness is not leading you to a better quality of life. Just say you're sorry. See, it doesn't take long to start hearing from your future self about what the future you would tell you to do. Now, the reason why I think it's so important to hear from your future self is because of a dynamic I've seen as a pastor over and over and over again, but you don't need to be a pastor to see how this plays out in other people's lives. It's hard to see in our own lives, but it's easy to see how it plays out in other people's lives. And here's the dynamic. People don't plan to mess up their lives. They just don't plan not to. Okay? Nobody begins their first marriage thinking about their second marriage. Nobody does that. Nobody starts a new business that is doomed to failure thinking about going bankrupt. No one gets their first credit card thinking about how it will be great to dig themselves out of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of consumer debt. Because people don't plan to mess up their lives. They just don't plan not to. Because honestly, think about how much work it takes to get married. Have you ever gotten married? That's a ton of work. Think about how much paperwork you have to fill out to borrow the money, to buy the car, to buy the house, to buy the boat, to buy the thing that ultimately maybe you can't quite afford if there is one hiccup in your financial life. It's a ton of work to do that. It's a ton of work to do the things that lead to our biggest regrets in life because people aren't planning to mess up our lives. We're just not making a plan not to. Every month I meet with a counselor. I've been meeting with him for about 12 years. He only works with pastors. The funny thing is, he used to be a detective and he only worked with criminals. I'm not making this up. And he says, for some reason, I understand how criminals think and I understand how pastors think. So you can do whatever you want with that information, but that is the true story. So I talk with him every month. And a couple of months ago, we were talking about how there are some pastors who have built some very large platforms and some very large churches. And then they do something that destroys their life and destroys the well-being of their church. They have an affair. They get into some money problems. They are the ones who turn some coping mechanisms into some addictions. And I said, honestly, those things that I see them because they're in the news, and in our line of work, everyone talks about it every time some big famous pastor goes and messes up, shipwrecks his own life, and then the church is just messed up after that happens. And I said, those things that tempt them away to destroy their lives, honestly, I can honestly say none of those have ever appealed to me. I'm just not attracted to that. And my counselor said, neither were they. That's what I said. Because come on, we don't plan to mess up our lives. We just don't plan not to mess up our lives. Nobody plans to ruin their marriage. Nobody plans to go bankrupt. Nobody plans to have to work until they're 75 years old. We don't plan on being overweight. We don't plan on using unhealthy coping mechanisms and getting stuck in addictions. Nobody plans on those things. We just don't plan not to. So in this series, we are going to unpack the more important question that gives us wisdom on how to move forward with our most important behaviors and decisions and choices and habits in life. And that question is, what would the future you tell you to do? What would the future you say about this decision you need to make? What would the future you say about this habit that you're forming? What would the future you say about your online habits? What would the future you say about the conversations you have with the people who are the closest to you? What would the future you tell you to do? Because if you do that, your future self would say, trust me, you'll be glad you did. Now, for the balance of our time, I'm going to show you the biblical basis of it, and then for the next 3 weeks, we're going to go to deeper levels of this, because like I said, at first, we kind of answer on the New Year's resolution level of the question, right? Yeah, I should lose some weight. Yeah, I should be better with my finances, whatever. I should read my Bible more. I get it, Jason. Nobody plans to lose their faith in God. They just don't plan not to. But we're going to go deeper and deeper every week of this series, beyond the New Year resolution level, and get down to the heart level as we move forward of asking the question, what would the future you tell you to do?